Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to Molten Music Technology. Today I'm reviewing the Nymphes 6-voice analog polyphonic synthesizer from Dreadbox. What you immediately notice is that it's very, very small, adorably small. Look at that, isn't that just lovely? It's made completely of metal. It feels as rigid as you could possibly imagine, and it's beautiful in its blue and pink. The next thing you notice when you plug it in and start to play it is the absolute absence of effects. Not absolute, there's a reverb in there which we'll come to. But what I've come to expect when plugging in a new synthesizer, particularly a polyphonic synthesizer, is big, huge sounds washing in chorus, washing in reverb, delayed, ping, pong, pong all over the place. Those big, dramatic, cinematic stuff going on. You know, whether it's hardware, whether it's software, you turn these things on and there's just a ton of effects. And in fact, we tend to find that when we use effects, we can pretty much make anything sound fantastic. Not with the Nymphes. There is a reverb in there, which is a slightly odd, characterful reverb, but otherwise, it's very raw. It's very there. It's very much saying this is an analog synthesizer with just a couple of just about waveforms and 6 voices, and this is the place where you're going to have to play. And that does produce in you a slightly different approach. You're not just preset surfing going, wow, this is a lovely sound, I'm going to tweak that filter a little bit. No, you're going, oh, this sounds a bit kind of, it sounds somehow how naked. It sounds like it's not complete. It's not yet been thoroughly infused with all that reverb and effects and delay and chorus that I would generally put onto absolutely everything to sound like the synth god that I know that I am. So what it throws up to you is this very in-your-face sound, which you then have to get to work on crafting. And so you're talking about crafting the filter, the pulse width, things like glide, the envelope, the LFO, simple modulations. And very quickly it takes you to these wonderfully analog, creative little spaces that perhaps you wouldn't have bothered with. You would have just been preset surfing previously. And I wonder whether there's something about that rawness, something about the design of that which feeds in to what the marketing and the box has been telling us about the intention behind this synthesizer. Because this synthesizer is, it says on the box, is dedicated to all abused and oppressed women. It says that may our voices unite and bring joy, light and happiness to this world of injustice and inequality. And each time you play a note on this synthesizer, imagine that you soothe their pain away and you'll become a better human being and a synth player. Fascinating. Now, I have no illusions that playing the synthesizer will somehow smash the patriarchy any more than I believe that playing with other machines will kill fascists. But it's a wonderful and interesting and heartfelt sentiment that I think is fantastic. And what I found was slightly odd when looking online at all of the reviews and video demos about the Nymphes is that they're all done by blokes like me. And that seems somehow a missed opportunity. So what I would like to say to any woman out there who has a YouTube channel and is interested in reviewing the Nymphes, that I will very happily send this to you for review, assuming that Dreadbox don't mind, as they send it to me in the first place. So if that's you and you'd like to have a go, then just get in touch. Send us an email or a message in the comments or something like that, and I will happily send it out to you in order to get a different vibe, a wider vibe, a smoother vibe from more people than just us blokes sitting around in sheds fiddling about with synthesizers. I think that would be great. So, back to the synthesizer then. Because I'm late to this party, it's been interesting to look at other people's reviews and see what it is that they've pulled out of this thing. And I think there's a couple of key points that come up time and again. First one is that lack of effects, and so everyone seems to put it through a chorus and a delay and a bigger reverb, which is nice and lovely, and I'll do a bit of that in a bit. The second thing is that the control engine here, people like to put in MIDI controllers in order to control the second level of control which is quite interesting. And the other thing is the price. It's only 450 quid, which is an extraordinary price for a polyphonic analog synthesizer. I mean, the only thing close to it, I suppose, would be the DeepMind 6 from Behringer. And that's a big keyboard thing, so it's a bit of a different vibe. Perhaps Minilog XD, you know, the desktop version, but that's only 4 voice, whereas this is 6 voice. But they're different machines. And this is coming from Dreadbox, which is very much a boutique manufacturer and has managed to squeeze a flipping awesome little polysynth into a tiny box that's beautiful and controllable. And I think what I'm getting from it, more than anything else, is that it wants to integrate. It wants to be part of a larger setup. It's not that interested in being all by itself, although it can be. It wants you to plug it into effects. It wants you to MIDI control it. It wants you to put it into your DAW and integrate it that way and have stuff feeding in and out of it, because it's quite simple in of itself. And it does lack things like CV control, and so MIDI is really your only way of unlocking its full potential. It doesn't mind that. It's not trying to be a big, all-encompassing mega synth. It wants to sit on your desktop amongst all your other gear that you've already got, because you've all got all this extra gear. And you're going to run it through your chorus effects pedal. You're going to run it through some kind of delay. You might add plugins in your DAW, because that's what we do. So actually, are we finding that a lot of synthesizers have superfluous effects on them, the same as they often have superfluous keyboards? Interesting, isn't it? So it feels very much like there's a lot of thought gone into this, because they wanted, so it seems, to make a compact, fantastic little polysynth. And so to do that, they've had to compromise and find ways around things. And I think the fact that you can get into it via MIDI, I think the fact that we do already have effects knocking around really plays into what this is about. So, enough talk, I think. I think we need to start making some sounds with it. So, for the purpose of this review, I'm going to, for the most part, stay in the box. Stay on this thing. Because for me, adding extra effects is fine, and I'll do that at the end. But that takes away, I think, from the beauty of the analog circuitry that's within this little synth, and you get lost in all of that. But I mean, oh my word, these huge sounds that you can get once you start adding a chorus and delay and bits and pieces like that are just phenomenal. So that is there, that is potential down the line. But let's look at the box by itself. Similarly with the control thing, I've mapped in a MIDI controller like this one, which is quite a fabulous little thing, in order to access all the other MIDI controls. But I also think that that's not necessarily the point either, because we want to stay within the architecture of the synth itself. The user interface that Dreadbox have given us, that has to be usable to a degree. And I'm finding that actually it is. It's a lot less trouble than a lot of other people have suggested perhaps it may be. But, each to his own and all that kind of thing. So I'm going to focus purely on that. I'm going to bring you in. Let's have a look from above and from the side, and just have a play. Right, so this is all of the front panel. You get these sliders, you get a couple of knobs and a couple of buttons, and everything is accessible within this structure. You don't need to plug in a separate MIDI interface or MIDI controller. You don't need to access it in any other way. It is all here with a little bit of this shift button stuff. Yeah. So the basic idea is that things along the bottom are available straight away. Things along the top are accessible via the shift button. So anything in pink, you need the shift button. You can either hold it and move things momentarily, or you can double tap it to leave it on and access it that way. For the menu here, which takes us into interesting places, you have this knob, which acts as everything. It does the bloody lot. Whether it's selecting presets, selecting mode, selecting reverb modes and bits and pieces, everything is done by the twisting of that knob in quite a clever, compact and slightly mystifying fashion. But it's good, it works. So this is a simple polyphonic initialized patch. Let's just fully open the filter. And that's just as nice as polyphonic analog gets. It's lovely. You have different waveforms, just the three: sawtooth, through the square, through the triangle. Which is nice. You have control over the level of the waveform and also a sub, which just gives it a lovely juiciness. You can introduce noise, or you can have the noise by itself if that's what you're after. And then you have an LFO amount, which refers to LFO number 1, which is over here. Which is lovely. So an LFO which can be stuck into the pitch here, or you can also be stuck into the filter via the shift mode, which we'll come on to in a moment. And then we have the filter section with a low pass filter. Some juicy resonance. Although you do get quite a lot of roll off as you get up this far. Over here you get the ADSR, which is the envelope for the filter. Now that's interesting. I find that quite an interesting decision because they have this 2-level thing going on under the shift button, which we'll come to shortly. And the envelope for the oscillator, for the VCA, for the level of the sound is in the shift mode, whereas the envelope for the filter is in the non-shift mode. And I wonder about that priority. I wonder whether you're fiddling more with the filter envelope or the amplifier envelope. And this is an opportunity to show you what happens when you press shift. Now you can hold shift and then access all of the pink controls across the top, or you can double tap it to leave it enabled. So I can now move to controlling the ADSR over the amplifier. you may have noticed in switching between the two is that you lose all track of what the other ones were set to. And this is the biggest problem, I think, with the shift system. While it's not difficult to press the button or to leave the button enabled in order for you to move the sliders about, what happens is that I've completely lost the visualization of that envelope, because I like seeing what the envelope's doing. But once I go into shift mode and I want to change something for that, that's not changing the filter, that's changing the VCA. And so when I go back to the filter, it's not the same. And I've still got the attack on the envelope for the VCA, even though the attack's down here because I'm in this mode. Do you see what I'm saying? So there is absolutely a disconnect between those two pages, between what you see on the faders and what's actually happening. That is perhaps the one thing that frustrates me the most, perhaps, because I do, in hardware in particular, I like to be able to see my patch. I really do. I like to be able to see it, and anything which compromises that, I feel is definitely a compromise that you feel. So nice. Now, regardless, I can now, because I'm on the top line here with the shift down, I can direct the LFO to the filter. What I've done quite classically here is I've forgotten that I'm in shift and I've tried to increase the rate of the LFO, and what I've actually done is increase the delay. Now, that brings me to this, which is very, very interesting. Delay and fade. It's not something I've come across a great deal on synthesizers. It's inevitably there, I imagine, but it's just not something that I've really thought about a great deal. And what you end up is this adds a delay to the coming in of that LFO, and it fades it out as well, both which are very, very interesting. If I make this a more instant sound, you'll then hear the LFO come in as I play. Turn it up a bit. It's a brilliant effect. I just absolutely love what that does. And then again, it can fade out. Back to nothing. Oh, that's just fantastic. that's LFO1. There's a second LFO that you can patch to pretty much any slider on the front that we get to in the menu. We'll do that in a second. We just need to do the rest of this stuff over here. We've had the LFO to the filter. We've then got key tracking as well, which you can put in. So it tracks your keyboard a bit more. And then you've got a high pass filter. And then lastly, across the top, you've got the pitch envelope generator to send the envelope also to the pitch, if you wish. You've got chord mode, which does nothing in poly mode. We'll come to that in a second. Detuning is the same. Glide. Like so. And then pulse width modulation. So that's your basic functionality, but within there's so much scope for sound. I mean, every time I sit down with it and just play around, I'm finding new and exciting, pretty awesome bits and pieces. And it's all within this simple waveform analog context. I'm not having to load wavetables. I'm not searching through 1,000 different cross-referenced and cross-modulated waveforms and samples in order to find a sound. I've just got triangle, square or sawtooth, bit of a filter, bit of modulation. Right, let's move into a monophonic mode to use some of the extra features that are within here. So I'm going to load a preset, which I do by getting out of there, pressing the load button, and then going to hold shift in order to select the bank. So I'm going to select bank G, and then release shift to select preset number 7 on bank G. Now, as you can hear, that sounds pretty meaty. And it is. Let's load it in properly. Now we're going to go into these modes here in the menu, which is really exciting stuff. Okay, ready for this? So I press menu, and I can choose, again, using my knob at the top here, from options that I want, 1 to 7. So I'm going to go to mode, and the mode can either be poly, uni A, uni B, tri, duo, or mono, and then there's a chord thing. So in order to get to the next level of menu, because I've now selected this one down here, down to number 1, press menu again, and I can now select 1 to 7 to select what I want. So 1 is poly mode, 2 is a 6-voice stack, which gets even more interesting once you start using things like really nice. Then you've got another unison mode, which I think is four notes, so a little bit less intense. Then you've got a tri mode, which is two lots of 3 oscillators. No, 3 lots of 2 oscillators. So you've now got a 3-voice 2 oscillator synth. Then you've got duophonic, which gives you two notes on 3 oscillators. Do you see what I mean? Then you've got simple mono mode, single oscillator. But the one you want is definitely the 6-voice unison. It's just an absolute delight. So as I say, it's very easy to lose yourself just in playing around, and hopefully you can see that shifting between these two panels is not difficult. Now it does create errors, it does create things you do by accident, and also of course you're trying to find where that value is when you switch between one and the other. But in performance, in the idea of creating and messing about with sound, it doesn't really become a problem, because you're finding your way through and you're discovering things and you're reacting to the changes that happen. And that is perhaps an unintentional result of this kind of interface. So there are definite cons to it, but there's also pros as well, and there's nothing to say that you can't have a fabulous time here with the shift button, with your fingers, just with the Nymphes. Right, something that came up as I was doing that is chord mode. This is quite nice. In fact, it reminds me a lot of the Modular Polycinematic, the Eurorack module that I have, which is rather splendid. It's a similar idea. I mean, MIDI keyboards often have this where you can pump chords into different synths, but this has a chord mode within itself, which is an interesting way to use the unison modes within here. So, of course, it's all over the place at the moment. So let me go back to that original patch. Okay, so I'm going on to shift mode, chord, which is this one here. So there's 7, I think. And you've got a chord mode down here under the modes, and that's a place where you can put in your own chords. So it can be anything you like. You could put in a whole sort of song and then switch between those chords as you're going along. it's quite interesting. I mean, what we could do is we could bring in the second LFO. There's an LFO within the menu, which is a global LFO, which you can just stuff into whatever sliders you want it to be. So if we go into menu, go down to LFO 2, on number 2 there. Now, these bits here now refer to LFO 2, and the destinations will be whatever it is that I move. So I've got shift on, I can put it into chord. And as you can hear, it's now, the LFO is now changing the chord. It's just really good fun. And of course what I'm doing now is I'm also allocating the cutoff to the same LFO2, which wasn't what I intended because I left this button on. But that's interesting nonetheless, but I'll just bring that down. If I take myself out of menu mode, I've now got proper control over everything again. Of course, the note is not being re-triggered when the chord is changing, so I'm not re-triggering the envelope or anything like that. So maybe what I need to do is stick that one in as well. Now it doesn't always feel particularly expressive. It feels very much like an analog monosynth with a built-in keyboard that doesn't necessarily have velocity. The Nymphes, however, does have velocity, but it uses it in a broader sense as opposed to an automatic sense, by which I mean velocity and Aftertouch are both within the menu here and can be used as a modulator for anything you like. So velocity doesn't have to mean velocity. And when you start off with a noise like this, which doesn't have anything at all, I can create a velocity response by tying this to the level slider. Let me show you what I mean. So I go into menu. What do I want? Velocity. So that's 5, 5, 5. There we go. And now I'm in velocity mode. What I do is I turn up the slider on what it is I want velocity to control. So if I make that level there, Now, in order for that to have some kind of effect, I also need the level to be down so that the velocity can add to it. Do you see what I mean? So come out of menu, put the level down, and now I have gentle, gentle, louder, louder, and now I have velocity, or velocity mapped to this particular level slider. So I could map that to something else, like if I go back to velocity, if you hold down the menu button, it will go off and it will remove that modulation routing that you've put in. So if I instead apply it to the sub, for instance, so I go back to menu, I keep moving this because I haven't worked out whether it stays or not, so I just jodder it from one step to another just to make sure that it's the right one that I've selected, if that makes sense. If I could spend a little bit more time, I could probably work all that out, but it's working for me at the moment. So I'm back into velocity 5. I'm going to make that the sub, turn that off, put the sub down. So there's now more sub, depending on how hard I hit. Okay, great. So Aftertouch then, this little keyboard has a ridiculous Aftertouch in it. I say ridiculous because it's just sort of weeny and somewhere in the background. But if I go to, not that, if I go to menu, down to 6, which is Aftertouch, I could map that, say, to the cutoff. That sounds like a sensible thing to do. Come out of that, bring that down a bit. Of course, it is monophonic Aftertouch, or rather global Aftertouch. You've not got Aftertouch for individual notes. Or one that's quite fun is to map it to the chord selection, which is not that. I have to put shift and then put that up. I have to hold shift and then put that up. Nuts, isn't it? While the knob control menu system, the layering of the interface is certainly a factor, you do get this rather nice full colour, well, yeah, blue and pink, full colour, a guide in how to do the things you are most likely to want to do. I mean, I haven't found a need to delve into the online manual at all, just using these bits and pieces which tell you where things are. And then there's a little card as well, which gets you around the navigation of the menu, exactly what it is you have to do, which also gets you into some useful little additional bits. For instance, jump catch is one, because you may have noticed when I move a slider, because of its two-page nature, the slider doesn't always necessarily represent the thing you are moving, or the value of the thing you are moving, and it will jump to catch up. But you can switch it to catch so that it doesn't jump. You just have to move the slider until it hits the point at which that parameter is, and then it picks it up nice and smoothly. So you can switch between those two things. There's a couple of other, deeper level bits and pieces and tweaks that you can use, which are very well displayed on this little card, and it kind of fits about the size of the synth, so you could leave it sitting underneath just for reference. But the presence of this and the presence of that are extraordinarily useful, and something that every synth manufacturer should do. Take note, it's probably Dreadbox and Moog are the ones that make beautiful manuals, and more people should do it. So there you are, that's most of the tricks of the Nymphs, and it is just deliciously fun to play with. The sound is always just so warm and so pleasing and so affecting. Whatever it is that you're doing, it's just brilliant. So one more thing to look at, which is the reverb, before I attach it to a computer and just show what you could do with MIDI control and with effects. So for reverb, I need to go round to number 3 on the menu, reverb, number 3. And now these controls here now control the reverb. So you've got mix, and size, decay, and filter. Now the mix doesn't go all the way, you know, it's still fairly a 50-50. It doesn't disappear into the reverb. The filter does take out pretty much all of the top end. The decay is interesting, particularly when you pump it right up to the top, because it starts to linger, starts to build on itself, and you end up with this ringing kind of feedback. Which is nice. And as you move the size about, it sounds like this reverb has somehow got this monster inside it, which is moving about. Feels like it's been gobbled up. Yeah, no, I mean, to me, it sounds a lot like a spring reverb. It has that kind of vibe going on. There's definitely an analogy, lo-fi crunchiness. I mean, I know that this is a reverb designed by Dreadbox, designed for this. And in some ways, it's almost too characterful. It has a certain sound to it that makes it perhaps not sit well with other things that are also running their own reverbs. It's almost like you need a mix input so you can use that reverb on the larger stuff that you're doing. But because it's individual to the Nymphs, it can perhaps be a little bit too sticky outy. Let's load something else. And it's all saved with the presets as I look for a different sound. I would have to add the reverb back in. I mean, that's lovely by itself, but if I then turn on some chorus, maybe a delay, and a bigger, lusher reverb, it then takes on a whole other life. And now Nymphs is sounding like some of those other big polysynths. It has the sound that you kind of expected it to. See what I mean? If I take those out again just for a contrast. Bring it back in, a bit of chorus, bit of delay, bit of reverb. And then I can always bring in another controller to control the top line of stuff. So there's pulse width, glide, detuning, chord. Bring that reverb down a little bit. High pass filter. So the LFO, the mount, and of course here I've now got the proper envelope for the amplifier, and here this is purely for the filter. And I've also brought out the reverb controls and the LFO2 controls rather than having them away in a menu. So I could bring in the internal reverb, and that sort of thing. I've got controls over the LFO2 once I've selected that mode, so I don't have to find the right bits within it. And so on. So there you are, the Nymphs from Dreadbox. I hope that gives you some kind of idea about it, my thoughts on it. I think ultimately that what Dreadbox have done is packed an awful lot of fantastic sounding analog synthesis into a 450 quid desktop box. The price of it is quite extraordinary. It's only really competing with something like the DeepMind 6 from Behringer, which is a completely different thing. Although oddly, they both have a little bit of Juno-ness about them. This definitely does, particularly when you introduce it to chorus and delay and reverb, like you would normally process a Juno, I suppose. But it's also not that. It's not pretending to be a massive instrument. It's small, it's compact, it wears its compromises on its sleeve, if you like. So yeah, I don't have every slider. Yeah, you can't access everything immediately. Yes, there's a little bit of fudging going on, but just look at how cute I am on your desk and how easily I fit into your workflow. I'm not trying to overwhelm you with all my internal gadgetry and digital DSP whatnots. No. You just route me straight through all that stuff you're already using, and I'm going to sit there perfectly, you know. And that's what it does. It sits there, just doing its job, sounding like a flipping analog polysynth. And that's, you can't really ask for more than that. I can absolutely see how it's not going to really work for everybody, because, you know, having to hold shift, that might just be too much. It might blow your mind. I mean, you can map it to things, as I've shown. You can map it to a nice controller. Or something to give you a fuller extent. Yeah, and that can be interesting. I know that that fellow synth reviewer Tim Shoebridge has come up, or is coming up, with a complete software editor for it that you can run, by the looks of it, in VCV Rack. I mean, how fantastic is that? So that opens it up to a whole other level of editing that perhaps you don't get on the front panel. But I'm kind of shying away a little bit from suggesting that that's the way you should go. I mean, one way of looking at it is that it's an analog synthesizer which could be run by your DAW. And then that's the connection. It's a bit like running one of those little modal synths where really it only comes alive once you use the software editor. That is absolutely right, but I'm pushing back against that a little bit to say that you can do everything within the interface itself. You don't need to connect another MIDI controller. You don't need to do that to use a software editor. It will give you perhaps a different way of accessing it, but using the interface in itself brings in its own quirk, its own character, its own ability to accidentally discover and mess things about because you've got the wrong button pressed. And that is beautiful in of itself. And I don't think that should be discarded. I don't think this should just be a hardware plugin. That's missing the point, I think. I think the instrument as itself has been designed with a lot of thought and care, and that shines out through the interface if you give it the chance to be itself, I suppose. So there you are. Yeah, I really like it. I do, more so than I thought, because as I said at the beginning, when I got it out of the box and there were no effects, it felt very raw. I tend to, because I'm used to the rawness of Eurorack, I suppose. I tend to expect a synthesizer to dazzle me when I get it out of the box, because synthesizers are supposed to do that. And it didn't do that. But what it has done is it's climbed and sort of stepped its way into my heart as I've been playing with it more and more. And that sound is excellent. It is everything that you expect a polysynth, an analog polysynth, to be. Once you've got over the fact that it's not a wavetable synth, that it doesn't have umpteen different waveforms in it, or different samples, or different morphs between 16 different waveform type things. Once your brain has got around the fact it's just simple oscillators in there, 6 of them doing the job. Once you've got your head around that, it's an absolute joy to use. And then this is just the starting point. Once you pump it through effects and pump it through other bits, okay, once you stick in MIDI control, it all goes to other places. But what a great size device to be able to stick on your desktop amongst your other garbage and just wire it straight in, and it will be working. Stick it in via MIDI. I mean, I was messing about with USB for a while, but then my Surface decided it couldn't supply enough power to run this and this and this and this all at the same time. So I thought, sod it, I'll just plug this into the wall and I'll use proper MIDI. And that works brilliantly. Which of course it does. So there you are. And yeah, just to say again that if you're a woman with a YouTube channel out there and you'd like to review this, I will most happily send it to you if I'm able to. So do get in touch. And in the meantime, go and make some tunes.